Moscow air, thick with the scent of pine and burning wood, held a constant chill that even the summer sun could not fully dispel. In this ancient city of wooden houses and golden domes, a great and terrible legend was born, not in a field of battle or a king's court, but in the echoing chambers of a besieged palace. He was born Ivan Vasilievich, and his cradle was a gilded cage, surrounded by the whispers of plot and the glint of knives in the shadows. From the very beginning, his life was defined by the precarious balance of power. His father, Vasily III, a man of ruthless ambition, had finally secured the throne, but his reign was a constant struggle against the powerful noble families, the boyars. When Vasily died, Ivan was a mere 3 years old. He was a boy prince with a kingdom on his shoulders, an empty title in a court swarming with hungry wolves. His mother, Elena Glinskaya, a woman of fierce will and great beauty, became regent. She tried to rule with a strong hand, but her power was a fragile thing, built on a foundation of shifting loyalties. The boyars, who had chafed under Vasily's iron fist, saw their chance for revenge. They mocked her, challenged her authority, and plotted her downfall. Ivan, a small boy with the weight of the future on his small frame, watched it all from the sidelines. He saw his mother, the most powerful person in his world, constantly battling to survive. He saw the cold, calculating eyes of men like Prince Andrei Shuaysky and Ivan Belsky, men who smiled to his mother's face while they schemed behind her back. Then, at the tender age of 8, his mother was gone. Some whispered of a sudden illness, but in the halls of power, whispers of poison were louder than thunder. The boyars, led by the Shuiskys, seized control. They moved Ivan and his younger brother, Yuri, to a less comfortable part of the palace, their new home a stark, unheated prison. The guards who had once bowed and scraped now treated him with disdain. He was no longer a prince, but a pawn, and they made sure he knew it. Ivan, with the sharp eyes and quick wit of a child who learned to read faces before he learned to read books, saw everything. He saw his young brother, Yuri, who was deaf and mute, mocked and tormented by the boyar's servants. He saw them laugh when his brother stumbled. He saw the boyar's insolent stares when they entered his chambers, taking the best food from his plate and sleeping on his bed. A silent, cruel lesson in who held the real power. They were not his subjects. They were his masters. He was a ghost in his own palace. He would wander the cold, dark corridors, a silent witness to 100 cruelties. He saw nobles tortured and executed, not by order of the crown, but on the whim of a boyar who needed to send a message. He saw their disdain for the law, their contempt for the church, their utter disregard for the child who was their czar in name only. It was during these years that the seeds of his paranoia were planted, taking root in the fertile soil of fear and humiliation. He began to see enemies everywhere, not just outside the palace walls, but in every shadow and every smile. His only escape was the dusty, ancient library of the palace. There, he would lose himself for hours in the stories of great tsars and terrible tyrants. He devoured texts on history, theology, and philosophy, learning about kings who ruled with absolute power, men who crushed their enemies without mercy. The words on the page were a balm for his wounded spirit. They showed him a world where a ruler could be strong, where a tsar's word was law, a world where the power struggles that defined his life did not exist. He imagined himself as one of those men, a monarch of unassailable authority, and the thought was a comfort that kept the bitter cold of his reality from freezing his soul. One day he was sitting in his meager quarters, and a boyar, Prince Ivan Shuaysky, burst into the room. He was drunk, reeking of cheap wine and contempt. The man saw Ivan, a boy of 10, and simply sat on his bed, a crude, silent act of domination. For a moment, a terrible anger flared in Ivan's heart, a feeling so strong it was almost an earthquake. He felt the humiliation in every fiber of his being. He said nothing, simply got up and left the room. His fists clenched so tightly his knuckles turned white. But in that moment, the boy who had been a pawn, a plaything for the boyar's cruelty, made a decision. He would not be a victim forever. He would become the most powerful Tsar Russia had ever known, and those who had wronged him would pay. A terrible, dark transformation was already beginning. The path to absolute power was not a swift one. Ivan was to remain a puppet of the boyars for many years, but the humiliation of his childhood had forged in him a will of iron. He learned to play their games, to feign meekness when he felt rage, to watch and listen and remember every slight. He would not forget. His youth, which should have been filled with joy and wonder, was instead a long, bitter education in cruelty, betrayal, and the art of survival. He was Ivan Vasilievich, the young prince, but in his heart he was already becoming something else entirely. Ivan the Terrible. His teenage years were a masterclass in deception. He moved through the court with a quiet intensity, a silent observer whose very presence was a source of discomfort for the boyars. They assumed his silence was a sign of weakness, a product of his miserable upbringing, but it was nothing of the sort. He was listening, learning, and planning. He saw their rivalries, their petty squabbles, and their insatiable greed. He used their own machinations against them, subtly playing one faction against another, watching them tear each other apart while he remained above the fray. He was a spider in the center of a web, pulling strings with invisible threads. In 1547, at the age of 16, Ivan made his first decisive move. He didn't simply declare himself the new Grand Prince. He made an unprecedented announcement that he would be crowned as Tsar of all Rus. The title was not merely a symbolic change. It was a statement of divine right, a claim to a power that put him on par with the Roman and Byzantine emperors. The boyars were stunned. They had never expected such audacity from the boy they had so long tormented. They couldn't refuse him. The church, which had long sought a strong, unifying leader, eagerly supported the change. On January 16, 1547, the coronation took place in the Cathedral of the Dormition in Moscow. The heavy monomach's cap, a symbol of royal power, was placed upon his head. As the Metropolitan anointed him with holy oil, Ivan felt the weight of history and the power of his new title settle upon him. It was the moment he had been waiting for, the moment the tables finally turned. His long years of suffering were over. Now the suffering of others could begin. That same year, in a rare act of personal choice that seemed to contradict his dark nature, he chose a bride. He rejected the noble daughters the boyars put forth, and instead chose Anastasia Romanovna, a young woman from a respectable, but not politically powerful, family. She was said to be beautiful, gentle, and kind. For a time, she would be a beacon of light in his increasingly dark world, a source of genuine affection that stood in stark contrast to the political ruthlessness he was about to unleash. His reign was about to begin, and with it, a new era of terror for those who had underestimated him for so long. The early years of his reign, however, were a period of surprising reform. Guided by a council of trusted advisors he called the Chosen Council, Ivan began to enact sweeping changes. He reformed the military, standardized the laws, and curbed the power of the most corrupt boyars. It was a time of relative peace and progress, a golden age that many saw as the result of their new, divinely appointed Tsar. But even in this era of progress, the old wounds festered. When a massive fire ravaged Moscow in 1547, a blaze that devoured much of the city, Ivan, still prone to youthful fits of rage, publicly blamed the boyars for the calamity, accusing them of witchcraft. The episode was a chilling glimpse of the paranoia that still lurked beneath the surface. He turned his focus outward, leading a series of successful military campaigns to expand his kingdom. He laid siege to and conquered the Khanates of Kazan and Astrakhan, territories that had plagued Russia for generations. These victories were a testament to his ambition and tactical cunning. They solidified his reputation as a great czar and brought him immense power and wealth. But for Ivan, they were more than military triumphs. They were confirmation of his destiny, proof that he was a ruler ordained by God. The victories fed his sense of invincibility and fueled his growing belief that he was above earthly law. The true turning point, however, came with illness. In 1553, at the height of his power and with his beautiful wife Anastasia at his side, Ivan fell gravely ill. Believing he was near death, he summoned his boyars and demanded they swear an oath of loyalty to his infant son, Dmitri. The boyars, seeing an opportunity to regain their lost power and restore their influence, hesitated. They argued, some openly, that they should swear fealty to his cousin, Prince Vladimir Staritsky, instead. The scene was a grotesque echo of his childhood humiliations. Surrounded by what he had believed were his most loyal servants, he saw only the same greedy, scheming faces he had known in his youth. He recovered, but the incident left an indelible scar on his soul. The boyar's betrayal was now a matter of fact, not just a childhood fear.